I'm excited that the time has come to discuss prostitution, the issues surrounding prostitution at the highest possible level in Europe. And I would like to particularly praise the European Women's Lobby for bringing forward such discussion. And I have been working in this area for roughly the last 6 years, but there are women in this room and also in Europe who have been campaigning for years, and this day really belongs to them and to their efforts. Last night we were reminded, for example, by our Swedish colleagues that it took 30 years to make the law right, and it is an important law for all our campaigns in our countries and also for the discussion in Europe. The European Network of Migrant Women I represent today is an EU-level non-governmental organization, and as I am speaking, the slides with our main principles pertaining to prostitution and sexual exploitation will be running, and I have based my paper on those principles. We are a diverse umbrella of migrant-oriented feminist organizations that are united by the common understanding that immigration is not gender neutral, and that immigration and integration policies affect migrant women and men in a different way. And producing gender-neutral legislation in the area of migration puts migrant women at a disadvantage. In the same way, gender-neutral approach in combating human trafficking fails the vulnerable sexually exploited women. And we are relieved that the latest EU direction on human trafficking goes some way to prevent this gender-neutral approach from being used in the future. The first Eurostat on human trafficking, the statistical report published this year, reminds that the most prevalent form of human trafficking by far is trafficking for sexual exploitation. And at the Civil Society Forum in May, which was the first of its nature, we were reminded by European politicians to not shy away from this fact, but to say it very clearly. Sexual exploitation is our biggest human trafficking problem, and women and girls are again at the receiving end of the suffering. Trafficking for sexual exploitation is a crime that occurs within the system of prostitution, and it is also a crime that remains largely unpunished. An increasing number of victims are women of migrant background, and in the present era of globalization, migration and prostitution are structurally linked. The laws regulating prostitution in our countries have to be revisited in that context, and the demand for prostitution tackled. Because if we refuse to act now, we will fail those among us who are weaker and poorer. Migrant NGOs, such as the members of the European Network of Migrant Women, have been responding to the complex needs of migrant women in prostitution for more than a decade by now. Today, these services struggle as they try to catch up with the ever-expanding prostitution in the EU. The extreme vulnerability of the women needing our support compel us, the NGOs, to lobby not just for increased funding for support, but also for an approach in Europe that will close the gap where their deplorable exploitation occurs. We support the Brussels call because of this, and we support it firmly because we believe that penalties for men who purchase sex together with support for people who are selling sex is the only adequate and proven to be efficient response to prostitution in contemporary Europe. Let me paint a picture. As traffickers and pimps are making more money and their seedy business prospers, the hard-fought-for respect to women erodes. The mixing of sex with money becomes a culture and a norm, and more men around Europe purchase sex. New terms to legitimize prostitution are appearing: sex work, escorts, migrant sex workers. In that regard, it is indeed most worrying that some academics are buying into these new terms, finding them more scholarly and sterile. These scholars usually do not engage with analysis as to why their academic position fits so well with the interest of the pimps and the traffickers. The new cleansed words around prostitution are then academically linked with the notion of human rights. And what are the outcomes? Botched perception of rights, harmful lobbyism, and shifting of basic values. Gone are the words pimp and brothel. Along this transformation, racism creeps in, as buyers search for new, exotic, foreign women. The prevalence of migrant women in prostitution in most EU member states is an established fact today. Women living in poor economic conditions are deceived by an optimistic picture of income that they can earn in the sex industry. Many are also targeted and recruited by agencies. The legalized prostitution markets in several European countries are magnets for criminal organizers, ready to ship women from the poor ghettos of Eastern Europe and even from Africa. These facts compel us to discuss prostitution with clear references to migration, internal migration, migrant women. These facts also invite questions. In terms of economic crisis with high unemployment and thriving racist attitudes, uncherished immigration, labor mobility restrictions, why such tolerance to the sex industry as some sort of a bizarre labor market for migrant women? Do we really want to see a work authorization for migrants to sell sex as nearly the only available occupation to them? We would like to remind that in countries with legalized prostitution, one of the most common penalties imposed is around the lack of a permit to be in the country or lack of work permit to sell sex. And we do not want to see migrant communities stigmatized by such regulations and penalties. Migrant groups must and should be part of the discussion on the response to prostitution. And this is why the European Network of Migrant Women takes this debate very seriously, and we value the invitation to address you today. And we're here with Modin Tambwe, who is the chair of the Belgian Network of Migrant Women. There are also clear examples of how migrant groups around Europe can influence and transform the debate on prostitution and bring it back to the ground and back to the present reality where solutions could be sought. An example of such transformative work has been done by the Immigrant Council in Ireland, who coordinate an impressive coalition of civil society organizations and unions in Ireland demanding from legislators to end the unnecessary tolerance to indoor prostitution. And I am glad that Denise Charlton is here today to update us on this important work that aims at creating another zone free from prostitution in the north of Europe. To all people advocating today for the rights of migrants, including those from the deprived communities of Europe, to prostitute themselves, we would remind that there are other valuable calls for positive and non-harmful opportunities for migrants, such as labor market success, qualification recognition, family reunification rights, and so on. Please come and support us on such calls. But please do not designate migrant women to the area of prostitution by the use of the term migrant sex worker, because it's infantilizing and insulting. For all these reasons, the message of the European Network of Migrant Women today is this. We do not accept prostitution as a real and acceptable alternative to employment for migrant women in Europe. We urge the European Parliament, the Commission, and the Member States to tackle the demand for prostitution and sex trafficking strongly and unconditionally, in order to avoid turning migrant women into a new poor cohort of marginalized women, satisfying the needs of a minority of entitled men in Europe. Thank you.